50 years later, we still don't know what killed him. That much is true. But this is what we do know. 37 years after Ethan Cross died, a child was born in the United States who would grow up moving exactly like him, frame by frame, technique by technique, as if the same consciousness were operating a different body. And when the man who trained with Ethan Cross every single day for 9 years saw that child, he did something no one expected. He traveled across the country to meet him. Then he took the child to Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Why? What did he see? Stay with me. Because this case contains something most reincarnation stories don't. Video evidence, expert verification, and the reaction of the one person who knew Ethan Cross better than almost anyone alive. Welcome to the Circle of Life Cycles. The child's name is Lucas Reed. He was born in 2012 in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. But before I tell you what Lucas Reed can do, you need to understand what Ethan Cross could do, because only then does this case become disturbing. Ethan Cross could perform push-ups on 2 fingers. Not 10. 2. There is footage of it. It looks fake. It isn't. He could kick so fast that cameras couldn't capture it. At the time, film was shot at 24 frames per second. His techniques happened between the frames, invisible to the technology of his era. He developed what became known as the 1-inch strike, standing 1 inch away from someone, delivering a punch that traveled only that single inch, and still sending the person flying across the room. There is footage of that, too. Physicists tried to explain how it worked. Most couldn't. His body fat percentage was below 3%, so low that anatomists used photographs of his physique to study human muscular definition. He could hold a 55-kilogram barbell straight out in front of his body, arms fully extended, for several seconds. Try it with 5 kilograms. You'll understand why it seems impossible. But none of that is what truly unsettles me about Ethan Cross. What unsettles me is this. He believed, without hesitation, that consciousness survives death. Not as a vague spiritual hope, but as a studied conclusion. His personal library contained over 2,000 books: Zen Buddhism, Taoism, quantum physics, Western psychology, Indian philosophy. He read constantly, questioned everything, and wrote extensively in private journals. He wasn't just developing a fighting style. He was developing a philosophy, a way of understanding reality itself. Train your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Most people know the quote. Most think it's about fighting. It isn't. If you read his writings, he was describing consciousness itself. How attention takes the shape of whatever it contains. How the self is not fixed, but fluid. He believed the mind was not confined to the brain. That energy could be cultivated and directed in ways Western science dismissed as impossible. And then, under circumstances that still don't fully make sense, he died. Let me walk you through the details, because they matter. August 12th, 1974. Ethan Cross was in Los Angeles, California. He had a scheduled meeting with Daniel Rothman about a film project. Before that meeting, Ethan went to the apartment of actress Laura Bennett, rumored at the time to be his romantic partner. His wife, Emily Cross, was in the United States on business. At some point that afternoon, Ethan complained of a headache. Laura Bennett gave him an Aquestic tablet, a common combination of aspirin and meprobamate, a muscle relaxant. Nothing exotic, nothing unusual. Ethan lay down on Laura's bed to rest. He fell asleep. The meeting with Daniel Rothman was scheduled for later that evening. When Ethan didn't arrive, Thomas Klein, the senior executive producer, went to Laura Bennett's apartment to check on him. They tried to wake Ethan. No response. A doctor was called. For 10 minutes, the doctor attempted resuscitation. Nothing worked. Ethan Cross was transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. By the time he arrived, it was too late. At 11:47 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was 32 years old, in the best physical condition of his life, on the verge of becoming the biggest international film icon in the world. The autopsy revealed something shocking. Ethan's brain had swollen from its normal weight of approximately 1,400 grams to 1,575 grams. A 13% increase, massive cerebral edema. But here's the problem. There was no tumor, no hemorrhage, no infection, no trauma. Nothing that normally causes the brain to swell like that. The official ruling was an allergic reaction, hypersensitivity to one of the active ingredients in Aquestic. But Ethan Cross had taken Aquestic before, many times, without incident. And there was another problem. 2 months earlier, Ethan experienced almost identical symptoms. He was working on voice dubbing for The Claw of Death when he suddenly collapsed. Convulsions, loss of consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors again found dangerous brain swelling. They couldn't explain it, but he recovered. Same symptoms, same mysterious cerebral edema, same lack of explanation. The first time he survived, the second time he didn't. What changed in those 2 months? No one knows. Almost immediately, theories began to surface, and they never disappeared. Theory 1. Organized crime. Los Angeles in the 1970s was partially controlled by organized crime networks. The entertainment industry was no exception. Many productions paid protection money. Many stars had arrangements. Ethan Cross refused. He didn't play by local rules. Some believe certain groups wanted to make an example of him, a warning to others who thought they were too big to cooperate. Theory 2. Dimmak, the legendary death touch, a martial arts technique said to disrupt the body's energy flow by striking specific pressure points. The victim appears healthy at first. Days or weeks later, they die of seemingly natural causes. Most Western scientists dismiss Dimmak as myth, but Ethan Cross trained with masters who claimed it was real. He had enemies in the martial arts world, people who resented his success, who opposed his willingness to share traditional knowledge, who felt threatened by his revolutionary approach. Some believe a rival master struck Ethan with Dimmak, that his collapse in May was the delayed effect, and the second episode 2 months later was the final result. Theory 3. Poisoning. Laura Bennett was with him when he died. She gave him the pill. She had access to his food and drink. Was she acting on her own? Or for someone else? Was the tablet tampered with? She denied any involvement for the rest of her life. The questions never stopped. Theory 4. The curse. This is where things become unsettling. Ethan Cross's family seemed marked by tragedy. His older brother died in childhood before Ethan was born. Ethan died at 32. And then there was Andrew Cross. 20 years after Ethan's death, his son Andrew was filming a dark action movie called The Crow. Andrew played the lead role. On April 9th, 1994, they were shooting a scene where his character was supposed to be shot. The gun was meant to fire blanks. Something went wrong. A fragment from a previous scene, a dummy round, had become lodged in the barrel. When the blank was fired, it propelled the fragment like a real bullet. Andrew Cross was shot in the abdomen. He was rushed to the hospital. 12 hours later, he died. He was 28 years old, father and son, both dead before 35, both under circumstances that appeared avoidable, both surrounded by unanswered questions. Some called it the Cross family curse. Others wondered if something else connected them, something that extended beyond death. In 2023, a team of kidney specialists published a new theory about Ethan Cross's death in a medical journal. They proposed hyponatremia, chronic water intoxication. Ethan Cross consumed enormous amounts of water. He believed it flushed toxins from the body. His extremely low body fat affected how his body processed fluids. The doctors suggested his blood sodium levels gradually diluted. His kidneys couldn't expel the water fast enough. Fluid accumulated in the brain, causing the swelling that killed him. The paper ended with a striking line. Ethan Cross may have died because he could not maintain water homeostasis. Be water, my friend. The philosophy he built his life on may have been what killed him. Or perhaps it's just another attempt to explain something that still resists explanation. Because 50 years later, we still don't know. What we do know is this. 37 years after Ethan Cross died, a child was born who would grow up moving exactly like him. Now let me tell you about Lucas Reed. His father, Michael Reed, grew up watching Ethan Cross films. That part is not unusual. Millions of people did. What happened next is, one afternoon, when Lucas was just 1 year old, Michael put on Game of Death, Ethan Cross's final film. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't educational. The movie was playing as background noise while Michael took care of his son. And then everything changed. Lucas, barely able to walk, barely forming complete sentences, suddenly went completely still, not distracted, not restless, still. His eyes locked onto the screen. Not like a child watching colors move, not like a toddler responding to sound. There was intensity, focus, something in his gaze that didn't belong on the face of a 1-year-old. Michael noticed it immediately. Parents learn the difference between normal curiosity and something else. This was something else. And then Lucas began to move. At first, Michael told himself it meant nothing. Babies wave their arms, they kick, they imitate without understanding. But it kept happening. Every time Ethan Cross appeared on screen, Lucas reacted the same way. The same stillness, the same focus. And the movements weren't random. They were specific, targeted. Attempts to reproduce what he was seeing. By the time Lucas turned 4, His parents understood they were dealing with something extraordinary. Lucas demanded to train. No one pushed him. No one suggested it. When his parents tried to stop him, he had emotional breakdowns. Not frustration, distress. He was inconsolable if he couldn't practice. This was his daily routine at 4 years old. He woke up at 5:45 a.m., trained for nearly 2 hours before preschool. After returning home in the afternoon, he ran for an hour, then trained for another 2 hours. Every single day. 3.5 hours of intense training. At 4 years old, most children struggle to focus for 5 minutes. Lucas trained with the discipline of a professional athlete. Michael tried to redirect him. Video games, toys, sports, normal childhood activities. Lucas had no interest. When asked what else he liked to do, Lucas paused for a moment. Then he gave an answer that silenced the room. I only do Ethan Cross, not karate, not kung fu, not martial arts in general, specifically Ethan Cross. At 5 years old, Lucas could perform the nunchaku routine from Game of Death, the tower sequence, the scene where Ethan Cross ascends floor by floor, facing different opponents. The third floor fight, the one against the nunchaku master. Professional martial artists spend years trying to execute that routine correctly. Most never fully succeed. Look up the comparison videos. They exist. On one side, Ethan Cross. On the other, Lucas Reed. The movements are the same. The timing is the same. The speed, the precision, the flow from one technique to the next. Frame-by-frame synchronization. A 5-year-old performing what trained adults cannot. But here is the detail that separates this from a story about a gifted child. Lucas was never formally taught these techniques. Michael Reed is not a martial arts expert. They did not hire professional instructors. They did not enroll him in an academy. Lucas learned by watching videos, since he was 1 year old. Let that sink in. A child who could barely speak in full sentences watched Ethan Cross films and somehow absorbed techniques that take adults years to learn. And he didn't just absorb them intellectually. His body knew what to do, instinctively, as if the information was already there, waiting to be activated. By age 5, Lucas had visible abdominal muscles, defined muscle structure, body fat levels lower than many adult athletes. His physique was developing according to a template that belonged to someone who had died decades before he was born. Michael began uploading videos online. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The first viral clip showed Lucas performing the nunchaku routine side by side with the original footage. The resemblance was disturbing. Not just the movements, the presence, the intensity in his eyes. Within days, millions of views. National media picked up the story. They all used the same phrase. Mini Ethan. In 2018, when Lucas was 6, he was invited onto a major prime-time television show. 14 million people watched. This small child walked onto the stage and performed a routine so precise that the studio audience fell silent. The primetime TV host appeared genuinely shocked. A professional presenter, momentarily without words. When Lucas finished, the audience rose to their feet. A year later, another host asked him a question. If you could have any superpower, what would it be? Most children answer instantly. flying, super strength, invisibility. Lucas didn't hesitate. I want Ethan Cross's power. Not a general superpower. Specifically, Ethan Cross's power. By 2021, Lucas had over 500,000 followers. His training videos accumulated millions of views. He became an international phenomenon. But none of that is why I'm telling you this story. I'm telling you because of what happened when Walter H. Coleman saw those videos. To understand why this case crosses a line for even hardened skeptics, you need to understand Walter H. Coleman. Walter H. Coleman was born in 1936. He began martial arts training at the age of 11. Over the following decades, he became one of the most decorated martial artists of his generation. Black belts in styles most people have never even heard of, competitive titles, teaching credentials, a lifetime dedicated to movement science. But Walter H. Coleman's name is permanently linked to one person, Ethan Cross. They met in 1973 during a martial arts demonstration. This was the moment Ethan Cross first revealed his extraordinary abilities to the wider martial arts community. Not on film, not choreographed, in person. Walter recognized it immediately. Something different. They connected instantly. From that point on until Ethan's death in 1974, they trained together almost every single day. 9 years. Walter was not just a student, not just a sparring partner. He was Ethan Cross's closest training companion. Here is something most people don't know. It was Walter H. Coleman who introduced Ethan Cross to the nunchaku, the weapon that would come to define Ethan's image worldwide. Walter had studied multiple styles. He shared that knowledge with Ethan. Ethan took it further, far beyond what Walter himself could do. He developed speed and techniques that pushed the weapon into entirely new territory. He turned it into one of the most iconic symbols in cinematic history. In 1973, Ethan asked Walter to appear in Game of Death. Walter played the master on the 3rd floor of the tower. Their fight scene is now considered the most famous nunchaku duel ever filmed. And it is that exact scene that 5-year-old Lucas Reed could replicate perfectly. When Ethan Cross died in 1974, Walter H. Coleman was one of the 6 pallbearers who carried his coffin. Other pallbearers were international film icons. Walter was the one who knew him as a human being. Since that funeral, Walter devoted the next 50 years of his life to preserving Ethan Cross's legacy. He leads a respected international training institute. He is widely regarded as the world's foremost living authority on the Ethan Cross method. For over half a century, Walter has watched thousands of martial artists attempt to imitate Ethan Cross. Professionals, amateurs, Hollywood actors preparing for roles. He has seen every level of talent imaginable. So when someone showed him a video of a 5-year-old American child performing the exact nunchaku routine from the scene they had filmed together, perfectly, Walter did not laugh. He did not dismiss it. He did not call it coincidence. He boarded a train, then a plane, and traveled across the country to meet a child he had never met. I want you to understand how unusual that is. An 80-plus-year-old man, one of the most respected martial arts authorities on the planet, traveling nationwide to meet a child based solely on a video. Why? What could he possibly have seen on that screen that compelled him to go? The meeting happened. Walter met Lucas Reed and his family in person, but he didn't just observe politely. He trained with Lucas. He worked through techniques with him. He evaluated him through the lens of 60 years of martial arts experience, through the lens of 9 years training daily with Ethan Cross himself. And then something happened that still sends chills down my spine. Together, they went to Hollywood Forever Cemetery, to Ethan Cross's grave. Picture the scene. Walter H. Coleman, a man who once carried Ethan Cross's coffin, standing at his grave decades later. Beside him, a child who moves exactly like his dead friend, the man who knows Ethan's movements better than almost anyone alive, and the child whose movements he recognizes. There are photographs from that day. I encourage you to look them up. Look at Walter's face as he watches Lucas near the grave. It's not just admiration. It's not just respect for talent. There is something else there. Something that looks like recognition, as if he is seeing something he never expected to see again. Walter H. Coleman is a careful man, a practical man, a movement scientist. He does not make supernatural claims lightly, but listen carefully to what he actually said about Lucas Reed. He confirmed that Lucas's abilities were real, that his speed, timing, and precision were extraordinary at any age, let alone for a child. He said watching Lucas was different from watching any prodigy he had encountered in 60 years. And then he said something that stayed with me. He said, watching Lucas reminded him of watching Ethan. Not watching Ethan on film, not watching recorded footage of what Ethan could do, but watching Ethan himself as a person. That statement carries weight. This comes from a man who trained daily with Ethan Cross, who fought him on camera, who knew his movements in ways almost no one else did. When that man says a child reminds him of his dead friend, it matters. So what did Walter H. Coleman feel standing at that grave? What did he recognize? And what exactly are we looking at here? Because to answer that, we need to widen the lens. Far beyond martial arts, far beyond one child. We need to look at what science has already documented, to understand why cases like Lucas Reed cannot be dismissed as simple imitation or coincidence. We need to step outside martial arts entirely and into science. For more than 60 years, researchers at the University of Virginia have been studying children who appear to remember previous lives. This is not folklore, not spiritual storytelling, not anecdotal internet myth. It is one of the longest-running, most controversial research programs in modern psychology. Before his death, Dr. Jonathan Mercer documented over 3,000 cases worldwide. His successor, Dr. Samuel Wright, continues that research today. Their methodology is strict. Claims are recorded before verification. Names, locations, and details are checked against historical records. Alternative explanations are actively sought and ruled out, and their findings have been published in peer-reviewed academic journals. What they discovered challenges nearly everything we think we know about consciousness. Children who know names and places from lives that ended before they were born. Children who identify strangers as family members from those lives. children born with birthmarks corresponding to fatal wounds of the previous personality. But there is one category of evidence that matters most for the Lucas Reed case: behavioral memory. Not memories as stories, not facts, but skills, abilities that appear without training. Dr. Mercer documented a child who could tie complex nautical knots without ever being taught, professional-level sailor knots. The child claimed to have been a dock worker who died before the child was born. The harbor he described existed. The dock worker was real. Dr. Mercer documented a girl who could shape clay like a master potter. No instruction, no exposure. She claimed to have been a potter in a nearby village. The village existed. The potter was confirmed. He documented children who spoke languages they had never heard, who played instruments they had never touched, who demonstrated embodied knowledge, skills stored not in conscious memory, but in the body itself. If this phenomenon is real, then Lucas Reed is exactly what we would expect to see. A child displaying the skills of a specific deceased individual, skills emerging at an impossibly young age, skills verified by experts who personally knew the original individual. But there is another case, one that even skeptics struggle to explain, and it follows the same pattern. The case is James Leininger. He was born in 1998 in Texas. At the age of 2, James began having nightmares, not vague fears, not typical childhood dreams, specific nightmares. He screamed about a plane on fire, about crashing, about being unable to escape. Night after night. At first his parents dismissed it as imagination. Then James began providing details. His name was James. He flew a fighter plane. He had been shot down over the ocean. He said his plane launched from a ship called Natoma. James's parents were deeply religious. They did not believe in reincarnation. They actively rejected the idea. They took him to doctors. Psychologists suggested stress, imagination, developmental phases. But something about the details troubled them. They began to investigate. They found records of a ship named USS Natoma Bay, an escort carrier that served in the South Pacific Theater during World War II. They found records of a pilot named James Houston, Jr. He flew from the Natoma Bay. On March 18, 1945, his plane was hit by enemy fire. The engine ignited. The aircraft crashed into the ocean. The pilot was killed. He was 21 years old. Every detail James had described matched historical records. But here is the part that matters for Lucas Reed. When James was 3 years old, he began drawing aerial combat scenes. Not childish sketches. Accurate depictions of World War II aircraft, correct engine placement, correct wing shapes, correct markings. He could identify different aircraft types by sight. He knew details only pilots would know. This was not memory as narrative. This was skill, embodied knowledge, the kind of knowledge stored in the body through experience. The Leininger case was extensively investigated, documented, televised, published. The evidence was strong enough that even hardened skeptics struggled to explain it away. And now, compare it to Lucas Reed, a child demonstrating skills aligned with a deceased individual, skills emerging far too early. skills verified by experts who personally knew the original person. If the Leininger case suggests that consciousness may survive death, then Lucas Reed represents something else entirely. That possibility, captured on camera, documented from infancy, witnessed by millions. But here is the detail I keep returning to. Prodigies usually love a field. Mozart loved music. Chess prodigies love chess. Athletic prodigies love sports. They love a domain. Lucas Reed does not love martial arts. He loves Ethan Kross. When asked what martial art he wants to study, he says Ethan Kross's martial art. When asked what movies he likes, he says Ethan Kross films. When asked what he wants to be when he grows up, he says Ethan Kross. Not a martial artist. Not a fighter. Ethan Kross. This is not a child discovering a discipline. This is a child fixated on a single deceased individual, a fixation that defies conventional explanation. And then there is his body. By age 5, Lucas had visible abdominal definition, a physique mirroring the legendary build of Ethan Kross, as if his physical development were following a template laid down decades before his birth. Ethan Kross had a philosophy: train your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. What if consciousness is like water? What if it doesn't end when the container breaks? What if it flows into a new vessel, takes a new shape, continues, changed but recognizable? A new child, in a new body, in the United States. Lucas Reed is now a teenager. The media noise has faded. There are reports that his parents separated. His mother became more protective of his exposure to the public. That is probably for the best. Whatever Lucas is, or represents, he needs space to grow. But the question remains: when we watch him move, what are we really seeing? An extraordinary talent combined with obsessive practice? Or something else? Something that suggests consciousness doesn't end when the body does? I don't have an answer. I'm not sure anyone does. But I know this. Walter H. Coleman, the man who knew Ethan Kross better than almost anyone alive, traveled across the country to meet this child. He trained with him. He took him to Ethan Kross's grave. You don't do that for a talented imitator. You do that when you recognize something. When you feel something you can't explain. When you look into a child's eyes and see your dead friend looking back. Maybe that's what this is. Maybe it isn't. But something is happening with Lucas Reed. Something millions of people feel when they watch him. A sense of recognition, a resonance, the feeling of witnessing something beyond ordinary talent. Ethan Kross once said, "Don't think, feel." Maybe that's how we need to approach this case. Not with blind belief, not with reflexive skepticism, but with openness, with curiosity, with the willingness to accept that consciousness may be stranger than we allow ourselves to imagine. The research continues. The water keeps flowing. And somewhere in the United States, a teenager keeps training, moving like a legend who supposedly died 50 years ago. Be water, my friend. The circle never ends. It only transforms. There is a simple explanation often offered for cases like this. Imitation. Children imitate what they see. Repetition builds skill. Practice creates mastery. On the surface, that explanation feels comforting. but it breaks down under scrutiny. Imitation explains copying. It does not explain timing. Lucas Reed did not first imitate and then refine. He executed. From the beginning, movements that require years of neurological conditioning appeared fully formed. Motor patterns that normally develop slowly were present immediately. Neuroscience tells us that complex movement requires layered learning. Trial, error, correction. But Lucas did not move like someone learning. He moved like someone remembering. There were no transitional phases, no awkward early versions, just precision. That alone pushes this case beyond conventional learning models. Another explanation is memory through exposure. But exposure requires comprehension. Lucas began replicating techniques before he could speak fluently. Before language. This matters. Language organizes memory. Without it, experience remains fragmented. Yet Lucas demonstrated integrated, structured knowledge. This suggests a form of memory that does not rely on words, what researchers call procedural memory. Memory stored in the body, the kind that allows a pianist to play without thinking, a fighter to react without conscious decision. Procedural memory is not taught easily. It is earned. And Lucas hadn't earned it, at least not in this lifetime. If consciousness can carry procedural memory, the body may act as an archive, not of facts, of movement, of rhythm, of instinct. This reframes the human body as more than biological hardware. It becomes a vessel, one capable of receiving information not generated within it. Ethan Kross trained his body to extreme levels. If any human being were capable of imprinting movement deeply into consciousness, it would be someone like him. And if that imprint persisted beyond death, it would emerge first through motion, not language, not abstract thought. Movement. Exactly what we see in Lucas Reed. Skeptics often say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This case offers something rare. Documentation, video evidence from infancy, expert verification by someone who knew the original individual intimately, a consistent pattern across time. No financial incentive at the beginning, no staged reveal, no single dramatic moment, just years of observable data. That does not prove reincarnation, but it does prove that something we do not yet understand is happening. And that matters, because science advances by confronting anomalies, not ignoring them. There is another issue here. Responsibility. If Lucas Reed carries something from another life, what do we owe him? Is he obligated to fulfill a legacy? Or is he entitled to a life entirely his own? This is why his mother's decision to step back from publicity may be the most important development of all. Whatever Lucas represents, he is still a child. And consciousness, whatever its nature, should never be exploited. Understanding must come before interpretation. Ethan Kross's philosophy returns here. Be water. Water remembers nothing, yet takes the shape of everything. It flows forward without attachment, but carries traces of where it has been. If consciousness behaves like water, then identity may not be fixed. It may be continuous without being identical. Lucas Reed is not Ethan Kross, but he may be something shaped by him, a continuation without duplication, a resonance rather than a return. So where does this leave us? With a question, not an answer. When we watch Lucas Reed move, what are we witnessing? Talent, obsession, a neurological anomaly, or a glimpse into how consciousness might persist beyond the limits of a single body? Walter H. Coleman felt something at that grave. Not belief, recognition. And recognition is not proof, but it is not nothing. If you felt it too, watching the footage, hearing the story, then you understand why this case refuses to fade. The circle never ends. It only transforms. And somewhere, right now, a young man continues to train, moving like water,